I decided that while we were doing the engine swap and all the rest, we would upgrade the air conditioning in the Rover. So you can see the radiators are out already with the serpentine belt conversion. This is the mount for the air conditioning compressor, so I could put a modern compressor on, which would, require the R134 Freon. So everything else is out of the car right now, with the exception of the evaporator. So this is the ring where the dryer goes. There used to be one of those old Rontec, whatever they are, the pressure regulator devices, which are pretty weird looking. So that's gone, to be replaced by a tiny switch. When I rebuilt the heater assembly here, this car had air conditioning to start with. The evaporator looked good, so I've left that in. I've got a new evaporator valve, which is just a Ford unit. So I'm going to have two standard flared connections is what this car originally had. But by replacing everything else is going to be O-ring connections, which it's difficult to try to convert because the new Freon, the molecules are so much smaller that it leaks really easily. So this is the old compressor, the big old York. This thing is just huge. As a matter of fact, it had all this extra bracing in it here to keep it from rattling the car to death. This is the old condenser unit. As you can see, it's 50 years old. It looks it. So I found a new one. This is 14 by 22, as is this. It seems to be a pretty standard size. It mounted with these tabs, which used to bolt here. The difference here, this is flush. This fin is halfway. So I made up some little blocks just to bring the tabs out yesterday. Easy enough. There's some 3/8 square stock with a couple of holes drilled in it. And I had to re-drill these because I needed to bring them in to get onto the existing mounts. Here's the existing mounting points right here and right here. This is why I wanted to keep those tabs. Those tabs have nuts welded onto them because you got to get the bolt in from under here. Basically, you have to put a swivel on the end of the socket and sort of feed it through the grill. Real pain in the butt to do. So, trying to do that with my other hand in there, trying to hang on to a nut. Really quite happy to save those other bits. This is where it's tight for the condenser for the fitting. So you can see that this bulges out. This is part of the headlight surround. The lines go down here. They come back up through here. The dryer will be there. They'll have one line that's going to come across the motor into the back of the compressor, and then the suction line will run back and into that fitting right there. And this one comes forward. That'll go into the other side of the dryer. So that's the plan. Here's the new compressor. I did have it mounted up before, but to get the radiator in and out, this has to be out of the way, unfortunately, so I had to take it back out. I needed to pour the oil out of it to reset the levels because it just had the shipping oil in it. But it'll be serpentine, so I've done other conversions, and the problem is that with a single belt drive, it's tough to get them so they don't squeal. From Jegs, I got a generic conversion kit. So it's got quite a bit of hose in it. It's got a bunch of different fittings. Obviously won't use them all, but it was so much less expensive just to buy it, as a kit than to individually order. So I've had to order a few fittings specific for my use. For example, I needed, these are the flare type fittings, which I'm going to need to get those two connections into the old evaporator. And one of the things we found is that the upper hose on the new condenser, both the hoses exit straight out of the condenser, whereas the old one, the top one, was a 90-degree fitting. So to be able to, you couldn't put a fitting like this in because it would run into the headlight surround. So at Cold Hose in Florida, they make a sort of, I think they call it a close fit fitting. So instead of having pipe, it's a machined piece. So it bolts onto the radiator, and it's only about that big instead of being this. So you save probably about an inch, and that looks like that'll make that work quite well. Here's the dryer. That's the switch that's going to replace the old Ronco unit. That's about it. Here is the new condenser in place. Bit of a struggle. This is the upper connection. This is the close fitting. I think if I had to do this again for the hoses that are going to be connected to the condenser, I would use reduced barrier hoses that are about a 1/4 inch smaller. This, I have to do, it's not too much, but I have to take a hammer along here, push this in a little bit to give myself enough room, and then when I did the lower one, because of the things that are in the way, it just would have been easier. I wound up having to, there's a hole in this chassis brace here. I wound up having to bend that at an angle to get the hose through. I'll pick the car up in a minute and show you. But if this had been a reduced barrier hose, that would have been easier too. And that just comes up, this is the other end here, and that's going to go onto the dryer that fits into that loop. Here is the view from underneath. You can see that's that lower fitting, the 45-degree. Kind of hard, that's the power steering hose. But you can see where it goes through that brace in this area right here, right there. I have to sort of bend that out to get the hose to wrap around, and under here, under the horn, and then up. You want to make sure you stay upward of the headlights, because that dryer is way over in the corner, so we don't want to be pinching any wires. So as you can see, this was a tight fit. This is the line coming down from the above, down here, and sneak it around. I had to get it behind this one, and then it comes, it runs along here. You can see it's sweeping up here. This bracket is really strong, so I had a giant pair of vice grips on it, and that pipe on the vice grip to give me enough leverage to get that to twist. I made up all the AC hoses. This is the big suction line coming up here to the back of the compressor. This is the pressurized line. It goes down, runs down underneath, and comes up into the condenser here. The lower line out of that, which you can't see, comes out at the bottom, runs underneath that sheet metal, and this is the end here, and then this is the other end, this end there. This is the other end that runs back off, feeds the evaporator valve on a evaporator core. So you'll notice this is not hooked up. This is the dryer, and that is because I'm not ready to evacuate the system yet. And if you leave it, this ships from the factory with a vacuum inside, and if you open it up, it's going to start absorbing moisture, which you can dry it back out again, but it's just a pain. So I'm just going to leave that unhooked, and also the pressure switch will go into this port here, and I'll have to wire that in. That runs power through, goes through here, and it eventually allows the clutch to operate here. This is the compressor. So we're just going to leave that be until after I want to get this thing started, make sure everything's okay, and that, you know, nothing's leaking, that, you know, I would hate to go and charge the system up and then find out I have to evacuate it again because, you know, I need to take the compressor out to get this up and underneath. There's a lot of stuff under the compressor between AC lines, oil pressure lines, wiring harness. is just, you know, the wiring coming up for the alternator runs down under the compressor. Just everything is in that one spot. I suppose originally when they built the car, this is the side that didn't really have anything because the AC compressor was here. Well, you see now we've got this huge hole here with nothing in it. So, but that's just how it goes. Anyway, so I'll do another video once I've got the vacuum pump hooked up and this thing wired in, and we'll show you how to charge the system.